What if I told you that some people can spend hours or even days unaware of their surroundings? Have you ever been lost in a world of fantasy, unable or unwilling to engage with the world around you? Stay tuned to learn more about maladaptive daydreaming and how to make changes if this is something you're struggling with. Welcome to this episode of Therapy Thoughts on Unwinding Minds. Today, as I said, we'll be exploring maladaptive daydreaming, its links to concentration, who is prone to it, and healthier alternatives if you want to change this habit. Please note that maladaptive daydreaming can be related to trauma, so if you're not in the right headspace, please skip this episode. No content warnings apply. I hate lengthy intros, so let's just dive in. First off, let's look at what it is. Maladaptive daydreaming is a type of daydreaming which is excessive and interferes with day-to-day living. It's characterized as a mental condition, not a mental illness, a mental condition, which is excessive daydreaming that interferes with your daily life and daily functioning. And it's really very common as a coping mechanism for individuals who are dealing with trauma, mental health issues in general. And maladaptive daydreamers might spend hours lost in vivid fantasies, months, years may be taken up by fantasy rather than being in the present moment, which can lead to significant distress or impairment of your personal life or your professional life. It's very common, as I said, in people who are dealing with trauma or traumatic situations, with people who are, at the core of it, very discontented with where they are in life. Maladaptive daydreaming is really very common in ADHD in particular because the brain is looking at creating interest, particularly when there's a lot of distress and there's more of that inattentive style of ADHD. It becomes dangerous when it interferes with our ability to be in the present moment. It's fantasy, and whilst it's, not a major medical disorder or psychological, or defined as such, it can lead you to not living in your life. You're living lives externally, picturing a different way of living. And in this way, it's a really useful tool to help you focus on you. Where am I? Where am I having these maladaptive daydreams? Where are they taking me? What is in these worlds that is so alluring and rich and beautiful that I access through music or through thinking, through movement, sometimes depending on the daydreamer? What am I experiencing in this other world that I have in my mind? And when we focus on that, we can start to understand what's missing in your current world. Okay, so it may be that you're fantasizing about being able to stand up to someone who is antagonistic in your life or who has previously been antagonistic in your life. And that could tell us that you're struggling with, setting boundaries, saying no to things with your personal power, and how to deal with that behavior from an external person. Or your fantasies might be more romantic in nature. So what are you experiencing in these romantic daydreams? Without wishing to know too much detail in the comments, what are you experiencing in the daydreams that makes you feel loved or desirable? Is it possible to change the circumstances and choices in your own life so that you can start to bring these things into your daily experience? Are you picturing saving the world? Maybe that's what's happening here. And this is just a thought. I'm not right about everything. But maybe what's going on is that you're hoping that somebody will save you, or that you will have the power to save yourself. So it's very important that we understand what the basis for your maladaptive daydreams is. What are you seeking elsewhere? And the positive side of maladaptive daydreaming is that it can be transitioned into taking action, taking steps to realize in the world rather than derealizing, having it in reality, making it into those things that you're looking for. maybe minus, being Superman. The beauty of life is that you haven't even met all of the many people who are going to love you, who are going to nurture you, and who are going to help you have a great time. And when we're looking at saving ourselves from maladaptive daydreaming, we have to bear in mind that the future is a distant and far country. It's filled with all sorts of things that we aren't expecting. And we can start to build certain things into our lives to create the existence that we want right now. Daydreaming on its own is not a particularly bad thing. It's the excessive daydreaming that we have to watch out for. If you're struggling with maladaptive daydreaming, I'd urge you to find different things to visualize and focus on. It might be prayer or visualization, meditation, whatever works with your spiritual path or secular beliefs. It might just be grounding. When you notice that you're starting to maladaptively daydream, what are you seeing around you? What are you feeling in your body? What is tangible around you? And making a choice to come back to those things. What emotion has arisen? And what can you take from your environment that would give you that emotion? Because there are always things to take from our environments that will give us the emotions that we're looking for. Admittedly, sometimes it's harder to find, don't get me wrong. But it's something you can use. Years and years of your life just listening to music alone in your room. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's so much beauty to your life that you can find beyond this. It's different for everybody. It might be that you need to invest in your hobbies more, investing in your self-care more, and really trying to focus on those things that will help you to thrive the most. By the way, if you're finding this video helpful so far, maybe just tap the like button, and hey, if you've been enjoying this series of videos, you might as well subscribe too. There's nothing wrong with a certain level of escapism, but it's so closely tied to that flight or fight response, because we have to understand that derealization might be occurring from your current body when you're fantasizing about an external place that doesn't exist, or at least tangibly exist. And those two responses within the fight or flight mechanism work in tandem when you're experiencing this. These are the flight response and the freeze response. So flight is trying to protect yourself from danger through avoidance, through running away, in a physical sense, but also in a psychological sense. Running away from pain, fleeing it, trying to switch off as much as possible through not being there. You might feel that you can't switch off during a flight episode. It's typically associated with overwhelm and difficulty accepting confrontation and conflict and working through it. It's avoidance of pain through conflict by fleeing. So what might be happening is you're running away from the conflict in your life, which is very understandable, but also not always great for us in the long term in our overall lives. And then there's also the freeze mechanism. When you're feeling very wound up, very stressed, you might find that you're unable to take action. You might be procrastinating, going blank, freezing, entering, that autopilot derealization state where you're not with your current experience. You might immerse yourself in other activities. And then usually it's flooded by shame, guilt, berating yourself, being upset with yourself for being lazy. You might feel that your life is frozen, not moving, not changing. So we can see both of those mechanisms starting to kick off there. And I hope that that helps you to understand what might be going on for you that's causing you to avoid your current life. And you will, hopefully, understand inherently some of the things that are causing you to feel that way. It might be that you're feeling misunderstood. You're not feeling heard in relationships, or you're going through abuse. So, I obviously want to encourage you to seek help, perhaps from a trauma specialist or a trauma-informed therapist, if that's the case, because trauma is something that can make us behave in ways that we didn't really expect to. So it could be helpful for you to seek out that help from somebody who does know about trauma and the kinds of responses it can create. I do offer counselling sessions, and you can stick to the end of the video to learn more about that, but I'm not currently a trauma-trained counsellor. I see it regularly in my work. I hold and support people who bring trauma through the door, but I also urge people, when it feels out of my remit, to seek help with somebody who does hold those qualifications. When I have worked with maladaptive daydreamers in the past, I've helped people to explore those feelings, the shame, the guilt that it can generate, and working on self-awareness and self-compassion. Because at the end of the day, we form coping mechanisms when we need to because we're struggling. It's much more reassuring to hear from somebody that it's not an unusual response. Doesn't mean it's a great response to be having, because it removes some of the potential for changing things in our lives. But to notice that it's reasonably common is very helpful and comforting. And I do want to talk about inattentive ADHD while we're talking about this, because these are not necessarily one and the same, right? Inattentive ADHD is characterized by symptoms like dysregulated attention, distractibility, forgetfulness, procrastination, difficulty with staying organized, feeling impatient or moody or irritable. Some of that has some serious overlaps with maladaptive daydreaming, because this is something that's often really misunderstood about ADHD. Dysregulated attention is not the same as not being able to pay attention. It means paying strong attention in inappropriate situations or times, like, say, getting lost in a fantasy for several hours, forgetting to do your homework, or zoning out whilst you're at work. So it shares a lot of similarities, and indeed many ADHDers on the more inattentive side tend to struggle with regulating their attention into things that are repetitive, not rewarding for the brain, not interesting to the brain. Essentially, the brain craves things that are interesting. It craves that dopamine. So it will start to look for ways to find that if it's not present in your physical environment. But the crucial thing to remember is that there are ways of making things in your environment more interesting. Looking at how you regulate your dopamine, what sorts of habits you take on, what sorts of things you do for yourself when you notice you're struggling with sustaining your attention in situations where you need to. And there's some serious separate differences between ADHD and maladaptive daydreaming. You can be a maladaptive daydreamer without having ADHD. You can have ADHD without being a maladaptive daydreamer. They're not the same. Because ADHD is a huge cloud of many symptoms that might include some difficulty with regulating attention and mood. And, something worth talking about that muddies the waters even more is ADHDers often experience a great deal of trauma in their life. The word trauma gets utilized a lot, I know. But what I'm talking about, it's not that, post-war thing. It's different with ADHD. It's not in our active war zones, but no less important are difficult dynamics between the family and a child who is growing up with a neurodevelopmental disorder and not getting sufficient support, not getting the right kind of support, or even having support from professionals who are not very good, or no professionals at all. So looking at the overlaps, we can start to see that ADHDers of the inattentive type might be even more likely to struggle with the balance of maladaptive daydreaming in their day-to-day lives. Worse still, the thing about maladaptive daydreaming is that it's very, very difficult to stop. It's addictive. It's addictive to be somewhere where you exclusively feel like the hero. You exclusively find that things go well. You exclusively feel like you're loved. You exclusively feel like you're the best thing since sliced bread. That is an addictive feeling. But at the end of the day, what's happening with maladaptive daydreaming is you're seeking positive sensation, unmuddied positive sensations. That's usually to oppose strongly negative sensations or challenging sensations in your day-to-day life, right? It's a balancing factor. It's you trying to address the balance through spending time doing something that is addictive and feels good. We can get addicted to anything that feels good, but particularly anything that feels like it could provide us serotonin, dopamine, all of those great things. It's important to recognize, though, that there are things you can do in your current situation, and you do have the power. Rather than reacting with these kinds of biological responses, you can start to respond when you notice yourself daydreaming more or daydreaming excessively in a way that's interfering with your life. What can you replace it with? Well, earlier on I mentioned productive visualizations. So looking at your current life and visualizing what you would change about it to make it closer to that feeling you get from maladaptive daydreaming. What feelings are you seeking? Are you seeking love and acceptance, wealth? What could you do to invest in a community of people who are like you, who like the same things that you do, who have the same interests? What would be one step that you could take today? Has to be something that you can manage. Maybe joining an online support group, like a Discord server or a group chat. Maybe it's focusing on your body more. You're experiential, part of a living being. Sensation is part of the gift of humanity and the gift of life. It is to feel and sense things, including pain and pleasure. And you can take control and take the balance into your own hands. It might suck. You might have to feel a lot of really unpleasant things before you start to feel a greater balance of the pleasant things. Because sometimes we're avoiding doing deeper work on ourselves when we go into daydreams and fantasies. Maybe if you're struggling with love and not feeling loved enough, it's time to evaluate what you can do about that. What growth is missing to create love in your life? Are you engaging with people? Are you allowing them to know you enough to love you? Are you engaging in some behaviors that are making you less lovable, less likable? It's hard to get to lovable if you're not likable. Are you pushing people away? Are you self-sabotaging? You can work through this alone. I often think that's very, very challenging. You can also work through it in therapy, and more information is in the description pin comment. I do offer pin sessions if you're interested in exploring these difficulties. I know that maladaptive daydreaming can bring a lot of shame and a lot of pain. And I'm here to tell you that there's nothing to be ashamed of if you're struggling ever. Struggle is part of being a human being. Suffering is part of being a human being. And we have choices about how you change that, how you interact with that. We'll talk a little bit more about what you can do and where you can get help at the end of the video. So therapy can be really helpful as a tool to figure out, well, what am I missing in my daily life? What would be some steps to actually get there? It might be, if you're looking at fantasies that put you into a greater position of power, like with saving the world, for example, that you're not feeling you are powerful in yourself. What would a powerful person do in your shoes in your life right now? You might not have answers to those questions, and that's why going through it with a therapist can be helpful, because you might need a little bit of guidance. The answers are already there inside of you. It's just accessing them and accessing those thoughts. It can be a little harder on your own than it is with a bit of help. The answers, as I said, are already there though. And you might be able to do a fair amount of that inner work on your own. That's the difficulty with addictive kind of behaviors like this, things that make us feel good. So often the focus that we put into that is stopping doing the thing that is addictive, that feels good. But really, the focus needs to be on, what can I replace this with? You know, kind of obvious real world examples. Smokers going cold turkey with a nicotine addiction. What smokers often do is have a nicotine substitute like gum, patches, gels, and those things can help with the addiction because you're taking some of the carcinogenic elements away and the habit of actually smoking the cigarette, and you're gradually weaning yourself off so that it's purely a nicotine addiction rather than all of the other habitual things. And obviously the long-term goal is to steadily decrease the amount of nicotine that you're relying on. But all too often I see difficulty or challenge in overcoming addiction or addictive behaviors when going cold turkey and when working at a pace that you think you should rather than at a pace that is working. Okay, so if you've been on the same nicotine dosage for 3 weeks, but you've had no cigarettes in that time, and when you try to go down in your dosage of nicotine, you found yourself seriously craving a cigarette to the point where it's difficult or impossible to resist, go back up in your nicotine dosage or patches or whatever method you're using. Go back up when it feels right to you. And when you instinctively, you really feel, actually, I can stay on this lower dosage without needing to smoke. That it's not going to jeopardize your progress at all. That's a good dosage, and keep it, at that rate until you can lower it. If you know that you're going to jeopardize your progress, though, stay where you are. You don't have to transition out of an addictive habit straight away. And in my experience, it almost never works. My father gave up smoking when he found out that my mum was pregnant with my sibling, and he cold turkey quit. But that's an unusual circumstance. Most of the time, there's some difficulty trailing off. Anyway, so I hope that this episode of Therapy Thoughts has been an interesting insight into maladaptive daydreaming. It's a pleasure to have had you listening to this episode today, and I'd love to interact with you quite a bit more. So now that we're at the end of the video, what are your thoughts on maladaptive daydreaming? Is this something that you struggle with? Let us know in the comments what you're struggling with and what you think is going to be the most helpful thing for you. You can find all of the free resources on our website, which there's a link to in the description and the pinned comment. Thank you so much for tuning into Unwinding Minds and Therapy Thoughts, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Take care.